So let's start off with the outlook that you came out with today. 2.5% growth is what you're forecasting for 2012. You're yet another organization, yet another body that has come out and cut South Africa's growth forecast. So I suppose run us through the prospects for the economy.
Thank you very much. Actually, what we are doing is really catching up with events. And we are picking up stronger headwinds coming from Europe. But what's different this time coming around is not just headwinds coming from Europe, but for the first time we are seeing headwinds coming from large emerging markets, especially China. Between Europe and China, the two largest export destinations for South Africa, that has implications. So that has led to us lowering our growth projections from 3.1% in November last year, 2.7%, and now 2.5%.
We had China's manufacturing data coming through today, and that showed a slight tick up. And many are saying that in the second half of the year, we're going to start seeing better than expected data. Tell us about, when we start seeing these numbers come through, should we start feeling a little bit more optimistic about the Chinese economy?
Yeah. Look, I think you will never feel extremely pessimistic about Chinese economy. They will keep doing well. And you will you will always see short-term ups and downs. But what our projections are showing is that both in China and in India, growth will be 2 percentage points slower this year compared to last year. So there will be an effect in these two countries for a separate reason from Europe. They are hitting the capacity constraints, they're getting overheated, and their growth potential has fallen, which will have implications for South Africa, given how much commodity South Africa exports to China.
We're certainly linked into the global economy right now. Amber, when it comes to South Africa, and let's take a step back and look at kind of what growth trends we have seen. 3.2% growth averaging in South Africa since 1995. When you're looking at the wealth effect, a 30% increase in GDP per capita since the late 90s, but this hasn't translated into wealth for low-income earners in South Africa, for kind of the bottom end of the spectrum. Why is that?
Well, I mean, South Africa, let me just start by saying that South Africa, you're absolutely right. It's actually one of the most unequal countries in the world in terms of income inequality. And what we've seen is that the growth that has occurred, which is pretty solid growth, has not translated to commensurate gains among the lower end of the distribution. And inequalities can be due to a number of different factors. The inequality that we focus on and that we think is the most important, especially for the long run, is inequality in opportunities, which is basically about leveling the playing field. In other words, you can have inequality in income, and if you look at the causes of inequality in income, you have to go back to creating a level playing field for everybody to participate in the growth process. And that's where we feel South Africa, especially when you're looking at certain kinds of opportunities, have a large amount of inequality, which translates into inequality in income. So it's about education, it's about health, it's about access to basic infrastructure like clean water and sanitation, particularly at a very young age. And
so let's step in here, because you've got this Human Opportunity Index, which is a World Bank index, and you've used it in Latin America specifically to address the issue of inequality. Take us through how the government can use the findings from this report to be able to now put into practice, ways to address inequality in South Africa.
So what the Human Opportunity Index does, very briefly, is essentially it combines the coverage rate, which is the average, the average access to a service, with an adjustment for inequality.
We start looking at children.
Yeah, we start looking at children, and we look at individuals as two stages of life, at the childhood, when they're children, as well as when they're entering the labor market, and all through their life in the labor market. And then how the government can use it, and how governments have used it in Latin America, is to use it as firstly as a monitoring tool. In other words, when you're measuring progress in your society, you don't just look at the averages. You look at the level of inequality that persists even if the average is increasing, firstly. Secondly, what it also tells you is that it's not just about inequality, but it's also about when certain kinds of people are being excluded from the growth process, or from the process of bringing education and health to all, then you want to look at what are the types of people and types of children who are being excluded. And if the people who are being excluded are systematically of a certain type, So in South Africa's case, for example, it's people from the rural areas and townships. It's children born in households with lower level of education. It's the certain ethnic groups, the non-white ethnic groups. So these are the types of people that you're concerned about, and what you can do using the Human Opportunity Index is to monitor progress, not just for the nation as a whole, but also
for those specific groups. We have seen the access to basic education improving, access to electricity improving on the other end of the spectrum, issues around overcrowding in neighborhoods, issues around safety. You know, those kind of issues also impact your ability to be able to then go to school and be able to, you know, live in a way that allows you to be able to further your, you know, education. So tell us about the positives and the negatives when it comes to what the findings were this year.
Right. So absolutely, I think what we see is mixed progress in South Africa. As you said, progress has been very good in expanding access to primary education in South Africa, access to telecommunications, access to electricity. In South Africa stands out compared to other countries. Now, progress has been much more mixed when you look at access to water and sanitation, when you look at safety in neighborhoods, when you look at early childhood development, which we have found to be a very important indicator for a child's potential to live up to what he or she can become. Also, it's not just access to primary education, but how the child performs in the primary school. Does he complete primary school on time or not? That progress has also been limited, but also unequal in South Africa. So a person's circumstances have a bearing in terms of whether they're in a successful group or unsuccessful group, whether the person comes from rural areas, townships, or other urban areas make a difference.
Basically, you have to break down the data to see where the inequalities are, and then you can make informed policy decisions. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was Sandeep Mahajan and Ambar Narayan from the World Bank.